Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by developing yourself, developing your skills, your habits, your network, and more. I'm one of your hosts, Aaron Hayslip, and today it's just me. We're talking about this big question, which is how can you be successful in a coding bootcamp? So whether you are currently in a coding bootcamp or you're considering doing one, or you're skeptical about them and that you can't be successful in them, whatever it is you're thinking through, this episode's for you. If you are anywhere in the bootcamp process, this is literally my last 7 years of thinking through this problem and the main piece of advice that I would give you if you're trying to become that person who'd be successful in a coding bootcamp and then move on to getting a job as a software engineer or starting your own startup. I hope you enjoy. So regardless of whether you're currently in a boot camp or you're considering a boot camp or thinking about maybe one day you might go to a boot camp, this episode is going to be helpful for you. And let me give you some context here for who I am if you're new to the podcast and why this question of being a successful boot camp student is probably the thing I think about more than anything else in the world right now, and really has been for the last 7 years. So I've started 3 coding boot camps before, starting in 2015, across the world in another country, started a boot camp, started another in-person boot camp in North Carolina. And now I run an online coding boot camp and I'm based in Austin, Texas. So I've literally have trained or taught hundreds of coding boot camp students. And still one of the main questions I get from those students or prospective students is, how do you be successful? And not only do I get this question from students, but I'm thinking about it all the time because for my own sake, it behooves me to make sure that all of our students are successful. That's literally how my business grows and my family eats dinner. So I'm always thinking about, how do I improve the students that are coming through our pipeline, and how do I really filter out the students that are coming through our pipeline? That's one of the reasons, to be honest, why my school or our school Parsity isn't very big, that we only have 20 students per cohort, because I just don't think you could grow it much bigger without filtering out a ton of people, on the front end. And so that being said, let's get into what I believe and what I know from my experience to be true of successful coding bootcamp students. And these are students who come through the program, they learn a ton, they land a job quickly, or frankly, some of them start their own companies. We just literally had a couple of students start their own Web3 development agency in the last couple of weeks. And so far, they're killing it, right? And they just did this because they were successful bootcamp students. So that being said, here is sort of the outline for where we're going to go with this podcast. I'm going to start off here by giving you the TLDR of the, one sentence, what it means to be a successful bootcamp student. How do you do it? Then we're going to go into a couple disclaimers that I have, such as what makes for a good bootcamp and how do you know that you're ready for a bootcamp. And then we're going to walk through the meat of this episode, which is I believe that you being successful requires that you work on 4 areas. And you've probably heard me talk about these 4 areas before, but we're going to dive into them specifically about this question. 1, your skills. 2, your habits. 3, your mindset. And 4, your network. It's not enough just to have one of these in place. We need all 4. And so I'm going to walk through what I've seen successful students do at a real practical level in each of these 4 areas. Okay, so the TLDR, if you don't know what that means, too long, didn't read, the summary of this whole episode can be summarized in this one phrase. And this phrase I got from Peter Elbaum, the co-host of this podcast. He's also a staff member at Parsity. And this last week, Peter and I were doing these launch meetings with all the students. Him and I were kind of coordinating and giving them advice on how to do well in the bootcamp. And Peter kept on giving this one piece of advice, which is process over results. Embrace processes over results. In other words, you should think about how the learning is actually happening rather than the result of the learning. Now, I'm going to unpack that more, obviously, throughout this whole episode, but just wanted to give credit where credit is due, that I think Peter summarized that really well. The best students that I see in coding boot camps are those who embrace the process, the nitty-gritty, the grind over the actual results. It's not about getting the answer right. It's about learning how things actually work. That being said, I want to now go into a couple disclaimers about, what makes for a good boot camp and how you know you're there ready until we go back to this one idea, which is process over results, and kind of unpack that through your skills, habits, mindset, and network. So my first disclaimer here is to think through what makes for a good boot camp. Because we're talking about students being successful in a boot camp. We can't really say that applies to every boot camp because not every boot camp is the same. The two things I say you should look for in a coding boot camp and should avoid ones that don't have this are, one, an admissions code challenge. If they don't make you code on the way in, then how do you know that they're confident that they can get you a job later, right? I always give the analogy of, going to a personal trainer, and the personal trainer is like, yeah, I can get you to bench press 300 pounds in 3 months, but they've never seen you bench press before. Maybe you don't even have the mobility to lift the bar off your chest. That's an impossible promise. And so definitely go through a boot camp that makes you come in with the baseline, because no one's selling magic dust or magic beans here. We're all just taking you through the hard steps in a systemized process to get you where you need to be at the other side of this, which is, a job. So that's one thing. Two, obviously, a history of students getting jobs, right? You want that reputation, and, we can go into stats and see if they're part of some organization report stats and all of that, but it's going to be pretty obvious. And then, you just trust your gut and your intuition beyond that. But I think at the bare minimum, those should be your filters for what makes for a great boot camp. Beyond that, honestly, I think it's preference, right? This guy, this last week, he asked me, hey, why should I come to Parsity versus going through Hack Reactor or Galvanize? And I simply said, I don't know. Which one do you want to go to, right? Because to be honest, if they have these things, an admissions code challenge, and if they have a reputation of placing grads, which I think they do, then it's preference, right? I told him, obviously the things that I think make our program good, which is the reason why I created it, is so that we'd have, we have a low cost, we provide all the services that they provide, so for theirs is much more expensive, yada, yada, yada. I'm not trying to give you a sales pitch on Parsity versus Hack Reactor, but I was saying that in the end, they probably also have a great curriculum, right? You can probably be successful with them as well. In other words, that as long as they meet the baseline, it's preference, and you should be able to be successful no matter which one you go through. So that's my first disclaimer, is not all boot camps are the same, and we can't talk about being a successful boot camp student if you're in a really crappy boot camp. But beyond that, if they're reputable, if they have an admissions code challenge, then you're probably good to go there. And then we can move on to the second one, which is, how do you know that you're ready? Well, kind of like what I just said, you need to make sure that the bootcamp you're going to has a challenging admissions code challenge. And I'd say at the minimum, you want them to want you to be able to program the basics of a programming language, right? So for example, with Parsity, we make sure everybody knows how to put together all the fundamentals of JavaScript, functions, arrays, loops, objects, all of that to solve, more complex problems. So if a bootcamp just says you need HTML and CSS, for example, I'd run, right? Because anyone should be able to learn that in a weekend. It's not easy, right? It gets complex. You can become an expert throughout a career on just CSS, but you should be able to pick up the fundamentals of it in a weekend. Not so with JavaScript or with any other programming language, especially if you've never programmed before. It's going to be a much higher barrier. So at the bare minimum, how do you know you're ready? Whenever you can program, right? Whenever you don't have to be able to be building full-on, full-stack apps, but you've got to be able to find the average in an array or find the most frequent item in an array. Something like that is kind of the baseline for skills. Now, the rest of this entire episode, we're more or less going to be talking about this question in a roundabout way of how do you know when you're ready? So let's dive into it. Again, I keep on repeating myself, but this is an audio format. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to walk through how to have success in a coding bootcamp through these 4 areas: your skills, your habits, your mindset, and your network. And in addition, we said that these are all going to be under the umbrella of this idea that successful boot camps embrace process over results. So let's apply that first to skills, right? What does it look like for you to be successful in a boot camp as it relates to you working on your skills? And this is probably the most obvious one. Students are probably the most concerned about their skills. Can they program? Can they learn quickly enough? Can they output what they need to output in order to land a job? Can they pass a technical interview? All those things. And I'd say, again, coming back to this idea of process over results, the skills here to hone in on are definitely in the realm of problem solving. Now, we hear that all the time on social media, and we see it in Twitter and job posts and that kind of thing, that we got to be good at problem solving. But really, practically, what does that mean for a beginner bootcamp student? What does it mean to be good at problem solving? Well, if it relates to JavaScript, for example, you know how to use the Chrome developer tools. You are intimately familiar with the debugger. If you get an error in your code, you know how to track it down and solve that error. You are not scared of errors. In fact, you sort of expect errors, right? That's how you learn. That's literally the process by which you build something is you code, you test, you code, you test, you code, you test. And along the way, every other time that you test, there's an error and you know how to go out and research it and inspect it. So I'd say the best coding bootcamp students are those who get familiar with this process of debugging their code and are not scared of errors. They embrace the errors knowing that, again, the process by which they debug helps them learn better than having the answer the first time. Process over results. Now, that's not the only way you get better at problem solving. There are all kinds of methods and techniques you could embrace to get better at problem solving. But the number one method that you could embrace to get better at problem solving is by solving problems, right? Working on problems. And this gets us into more of the mindset side of this, which is you just have to be okay with messing up and being frustrated. You have to have a high tolerance for confusion and frustration. But we'll get to that here in a minute. So first up, skills, embrace the debugger, learn how to debug, learn how to read error messages, embrace error messages. They are inevitable. They're not just inevitable. Bugs aren't just inevitable, but they're part of the process. If you have bugs, that's not a bad thing. You should have bugs. How will you learn to not have them in the future unless you have them right now? Okay, so that's skills. Next, let's get into habits. What are the habits of a successful coding bootcamp student? Now, this could be a really broad topic, and there's some really obvious stuff in here, right? To be successful in anything, in terms of your habits, I think you've got to be getting good sleep. That's clear. That you've got to get 8 hours. You have to go to bed on time. You have to have discipline as a result to what you input into your brain. You can't be distractible. One of the things I always think about in terms of my own focus is intention minus distraction, meaning that, whatever you intended to do in that moment, whatever you intended to use that time to do, are you doing that? And are you doing that without distraction? So it means planning well, all of that. But that's all kind of generic. So let's talk about, for coding bootcamp students in particular, what habits should you have? My first one here is ironic, but it's random tinkering, right? You should be habitually tinkering with your code. If you have a question that pops up about the code that you're working on or about something that you see, one, that's a good sign. It means that you are curious and your curiosity is being piqued. And I think you can build that curiosity, right? I think you can consciously be aware of whenever you're wondering about something. And then you seek out the answer, right? You seek out the answer by either, I think this is the first thing here is that you get into the console or the debugger, you start playing around. So, you look at this object, well, does it have these methods? Well, first log that object and see if it has those methods. Then look up documentation. Then ask questions. So you embrace random tinkering, right? That's the first thing I'd say about the habits that you have. 2, whenever you get stuck, you have a habit of sitting in it for a while. And I'd say sit in it for at least 10, 15 minutes. Don't sit in it so long that you spend the entire day stuck on this one problem, but you have a habit of sitting in it so that you can figure out whether or not you can find the answer. 3, I'd say beyond that, you have a habit of asking questions, right? You get with people, you spend the time necessary to ask them questions. If you're in a boot camp, these are your mentors, your instructors, etc. If you're in a Slack group, you post in Slack. And then 4, I'd say you have a habit of answering questions, right? Some of the best students that I've seen are the students that habitually look at Slack messages in the bootcamp Slack and answer technical questions, right? They are the go-to people. Doesn't mean they're the smartest. In fact, they may not be, but they're the ones that are trying to think through other people's perspectives and answer their questions. And sometimes it's stuff that they haven't encountered yet. So they use that as an opportunity to go and research either Stack Overflow or the documentation and try and answer those questions. But those are the 4 things I would say about the habits of good bootcamp students, besides the obvious stuff in terms of, getting sleep and not wasting your time and not browsing Facebook and that kind of stuff. All right, so those are skills. habits. Let's get into mindset here. I think mindset is probably the biggest one. It's going to be the anchor category here in terms of what makes for a successful bootcamp student. Okay, again, going back to our theme here, which is process over results. That has a lot of implication for the mindset. One quick caveat I would add here before we get into mindset is we're used to in school where we have this the standard where the thing that matters is the answer, right? Standardized testing, testing in anything at all, right? We're thinking about our grades. In the end, it doesn't matter how we get there. It's that GPA on the piece of paper that gets us that degree, and then ideally it's that degree that gets us the job. Now, we've all realized probably if you're thinking about a boot camp that system is broken, right? It doesn't exist. It's not true. The degree doesn't get you a job. In software engineering, nothing could be further from the truth. The thing that gets you the job is actually being able to do the work. So whenever you're in a boot camp, you are literally going to have to reprogram your brain to learn differently. It does not matter if you got the right answer. Even in a technical interview, if you're interviewing for your dream job, they're going to pay you $200,000 and they ask you a question and you give them the answer straight up, they don't care. And in fact, they're going to ask you a different question from there because what they're looking for is the process that you go through by which you find the answer. So yeah, of course, the answer matters in the end, but what they really want to see is not that you know this answer, but in the future, are you going to be able to get to other answers? And if you don't have a good process, if you don't know how things work under the hood, behind the scenes, and actually how you get to those answers, then you're not going to be able to get to future answers. So that's what matters more than anything. So a few things that I think should be able to be said about you as relates to your mindset. One, you're not afraid to break things. And this is a huge one I see for bootcamp students. They are afraid to make a mistake because we were conditioned in school to minimize mistakes. The more mistakes you make, the worse your grade is. And so in all things as adults, we try and minimize mistakes. We try to minimize mistakes financially. We don't take financial risks. But when in fact, the risks that you take are the things that build you into somebody who is anti-fragile. And actually this comes from the book Anti-Fragile. You should look it up if you haven't read it before. But this idea of a vaccine, for example, right? A vaccine, most of them they're injecting small amounts of poison in you. And your body learns from that poison. I don't know if it's actually poison. I'm not a science guy, but you learn from that and you end up being able to be stronger because of that. So you're not afraid to break things. Don't be afraid to break things because whenever you do break things, that's how you learn. Okay, number 2 with mindset. Students who are successful in coding boot camps, they are okay with being wrong. You're okay removing yourself from the equation. You are humble. You embrace the fact that right now you're a terrible developer. Your code is trash. And it is. Your code is absolute trash. You are a terrible developer. But guess what? Every single developer that's ever come before you started off as a terrible developer. So you need to be okay with being wrong and not stoking your ego. The third thing here is you embrace the hard way, right? There is no shortcut. There's no special tutorial. There's no magic podcast. There's no YouTube video that is going to get you to where you need to be faster. In fact, even a boot camp, even if it's a 3-month boot camp, the reason why it gets you where you need to go faster than a computer science degree is because it focuses on the right stuff, unlike a computer science degree, and it does it in a hardcore, intense environment with extreme structure, right? It should not be a shortcut. It's just a more intense cut. I don't even call it a cut, but anyway, so you embrace the hard way. The fourth thing here is you embrace constraints. Now that's kind of a piggyback to the last point of embracing the hard way. So when you think about the hard way, what I think about is, oh crap, you have to do things the long way. The hard way is usually the long way, takes more time, and you probably think to yourself, you don't have time. For me, I've got 3 kids. My wife is going back to work this year as a teacher. We just moved. Everything is complete chaos in my life. But that means that the few moments I do have to do work, record podcasts, write on LinkedIn, whatever it is, that I can't goof around, right? I've got to do the most impactful work possible in that limited amount of time. And that's a good thing. So even in this process, your mindset should be, I don't have a ton of time. I can't jack with that. I can't do that. So what is it that you're going to do to embrace those constraints, to not waste the time that you do have? I think that's a really important piece of this mindset. And then lastly, I'd say in terms of your mindset, and there's a lot of other stuff, one thing we're going to talk about probably here in a minute is Dev 30. And that's a kind of a pre-course we have for Parsity. It's open to anybody, no minimal skills required, and you learn JavaScript. But throughout the 30 days, we have a daily podcast where we do like 2 to 3 minute episodes, specifically thinking about your mindset. And it's called Think Like a Developer. So if you want more content, you can find that podcast through Dev 30 for 30 days. You'll be kind of working on your mindset. The final thing I want to say here, though, and there's, the reason why I brought up the Dev 30 is because there's a lot more that we could say about mindset, is you dream about building. Don't forget why you came here in the first place. You didn't come here just to get, a lot of money or to work remotely or whatever it is. You came here because you're a builder. You're a creator. You want to build. Think about what you want to build and then go build it, right? You literally can. I mean, anything that you want to build, you can build it. You just have to start, and you have to start somewhere, and it's not going to be easy at first, but don't forget why you came here in the first place. All right, the last area here that we want to think through as it relates to becoming a successful bootcamp student is your network. And again, embracing this idea of process over results, I'd say that one of the biggest mistakes I see bootcamp students making is this idea that you've got to apply for a bunch of jobs. You've probably heard me talk about this before, but applying for jobs it's a waste of time. I mean, cold applying for jobs, you're probably not going to get one. You're just not. You see those posts on LinkedIn where people are saying that I've applied for 300 jobs, I got 5 interviews and 2 offers. Cool. You could do that, or you could try to actually build relationships with people at companies that you want to work at and see if there's something that you have to offer. Because the truth is, if you do all these things, right? I mean, holy crap, if you're the kind of person who you have the skills at this point where you're debugging, you're embracing your errors, you have this habit of asking questions, tinkering, researching, you have this mindset of, you're not afraid to break things, you're okay with being wrong, you embrace the hard way. I mean, you are an ideal developer. You don't have to cold apply for crappy jobs. Identify the companies you want to work at. Yeah, maybe right now you're not worth $150,000 as a brand new developer because you have a lot to learn, but you will be in a year from now. So build your network with confidence. And here's how that looks. You should frequently post on LinkedIn, right? Again, process over results. At first, your posts are going to be crappy. You're not going to get any likes. And then you're going to think through, how do we get likes? Maybe you're going to take a LinkedIn course. One I suggest that you probably have heard us talk about before is Justin Welsh's. We've got an episode number 35, where Justin lays out basically how to build a big old network of followers on LinkedIn. So get into that process of writing on LinkedIn every single day, documenting what you're building, what you're learning. And here's the real kicker. As people, engineering managers or other software engineers, as they engage your content, then whenever you reach out to them and say, hey, do you have 15 minutes? I would love to learn about your company. I'm obsessed with XYZ technology y'all develop. They'll have context for you, and they'll probably say yes. And then build a system by which you do this all the time, every day, and you keep up with every one of those contacts, and you follow up, and you never miss a beat. This will not only provide you with a first job, but I swear it'll give you the next 3 as well. And from here on out, you won't ever be applying for jobs. You'll just be reaching out to people that you know, and you'll say, hey, here are my skills. And they'll say, oh my God, yeah, we've got something for you. Let's go. All right, so that's my advice as it relates to network. Create a process in which you're always reaching out to people. You're always building on your network. Now, in the beginning of the episode, I said that this topic here, this episode, is the thing I think about more than anything else in the world, right? And obviously, to be frank, we've had students that have come through our program who don't match these things. And they, a lot of them still end up doing well. This is the ideal. But I am doing everything I can in 2 areas to try and make sure that all of our students are this type of student. 1, we're filtering out those who just are not ready yet, or we're saying come back later. And then 2, to be honest with you, Dev 30, this 30-day program, which is kind of our prep course that we have, is literally built not just to get students or prepare students, but to make them into the best students possible. That's why over these 30 days, we specifically talk about working on your skills, habits, mindset, and network. And here's how we do that. The skills that we're learning are JavaScript. So this is a 30-day JavaScript course where ideally in the end, you walk away knowing the complete fundamentals of JavaScript. 2, as it relates to habits, we have a course that we walk you through that sets up your coding first schedule. So this is a way in which you can carve out as much time as possible in your schedule for coding. We think through your life plan, where you're going in the future. How does coding fit into the larger picture of where you want to be 1 year, 5 years, 10 years down the road? 3, as it relates to mindset, I already told you we have a 30-day podcast where every day for 30 days, you should turn that thing on while you're in the car. You're going through this process, and it's me telling you things that you should be thinking about, ways that you should adopt your thinking, because it's true. You control what you think about, which is a crazy thought. I mean, this is all getting very meta, but it's a crazy thought to have that you can control what you think about. And if you can control what you think about, it starts to change who you are for the better. So this is 30 days of mindset podcast that we have as far as Dev 30. And then 4th, for network, we are challenging you to post every day on LinkedIn for 30 days, and it's amazing. A lot of these students come through here and they never stop, and they end up building a network, and eventually, hopefully that leads to you getting a job. So the worst case, you learn JavaScript, you build your network a little bit. Best case, it prepares you to be an ideal student for a coding bootcamp, and you walk out of this thing, with your dream job, or being a founder of your own startup. That's happened too. The possibilities are endless. So anyway, that does it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. I hope this was valuable for you. It was valuable for me to think through and kind of lay out all these things in one episode. If you want to find out more about Dev 30, go to dev30.xyz. We just filled up our latest cohort, which starts, on July 25th, whenever, not sure when this episode's airing, but you're already too late for that one. We have another one coming up in October. You can sign up for it now. It is going to be $100 off until September. We always do that. It's only $50 until it gets to the month of, and then it goes to $150. And really, we charge for it because it makes you actually engage. We've done the free cohorts, and we've had 500 plus students, and 20% of them actually engage because everyone's willing to sign up for something free. But anyway, so that's Dev 30. Also check out Parsity, which is our online code school. It's PARSITY.io. Our next cohort starts in October, so you've got plenty of time to prepare if you're looking to try and get into that. Then, as always, don't forget to check out Peter, our co-host's YouTube channel. He's got an incredibly fascinating journey by which he learned to code through Bootcamp, got a job as a software engineer, and then quit his job to be an indie hacker. And he's documenting all of that on YouTube, as well as in this podcast and interviews. So check that out. That's all I got for you. Have a good rest of your day.